So I got a couple of inquiries in my message box that I wanted to attend to. One of them was asking me, what do I think about Sage Northcutt? Is he the next GSP? That's a good question. I guess, and partly that really depends on who GSP is for you. For those who don't know who Sage Northcutt is he's a new UFC fighter. He just had his debut in UFC 192. Won his fight explosively in under 1 minute in the first round. I think he fought Francisco Trevino. And what happened was Francisco came out and threw a side kick, which Sage just kind of parried away, and then looked like he just kind of parried away, and then he lit into him with looked like kind of hook punches, just a barrage of hook punches, and then went and did a double leg takedown, started smashing him with elbows on the ground, and then sat up and some ground and pound with the fists before the ref came and stopped it. It was fast. It was a minute or something around there. And yeah, it was a big debut for him. When the ref stopped it, he did a backward flip or some kind of cartwheel, and then a backward flip, and then after he talked to Joe Rogan, I think he did like a forward flip. He just did a bunch of flips, a bunch of acrobatics in there. Anyway, this is a young 19-year-old kid, and I don't know, like, to me, I think it's kind of weird how much hype he's gotten, given that this was just his first fight. I really only saw kind of the introduction material to him, the kind of commercial promo for the fight for him, maybe a couple of days before the fight. They showed him and his dad, and told his kind of backstory and all of this. He's a karate fighter from the age of 4, trained by his dad. It's his family's thing. His sister's into it too. Championship karate. I think he was in wrestling for a couple of years, and then was in Texas A&M wrestling. He looks like, the Anglo-American boy, right? He's got like Bart Simpson hair, sticky uppy Bart Simpson blonde hair, and he's got the dimpled chin and chiseled features. He's very shredded, athletic, and obviously he's got, maybe the question about George St-Pierre was about his ability to shift between the ranges. I mean, he showed even in just that under a minute that he has a bit of a stand-up game. Although to me it seemed a little bit like, I mean, it was just a barrage, and I know it was like, that's got to be a lot of stress for somebody going into their first UFC fight. And he just unloaded, and it was, to me, it looked a little bit sloppy, but it's not. It's a fight, and so he shows he's got a little bit of stand-up game. He's got the takedowns, he's got some wrestling skills. He can take it to the ground when he wants, and he did that, and he did good on the ground. So although they didn't get into any real grappling as yet. Like, what we don't know at all about Sage Northcutt is what happens when Sage gets hurt, because this is a fight game, and absolutely, eventually here we're going to find out what happens when Sage gets hurt. So we don't know that yet, right? So it's really hard to gauge anything about him with just the under 1 minute, or much about him with just the under 1 minute that we've seen so far in his debut. That might be what the reference to GSP was his ability to shift into different ranges of choice. I don't know, or it might have just been, you know, because of his, you know, he looks like an American fighter, although of course George St-Pierre is a Canadian fighter, and that's what I mean. If you're depending on who you are, whether or not Sage can be another George St-Pierre or not, really, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, on a technical level, I suppose, he has acrobatic skills. Obviously, he showed those off. He's an athlete, for sure. He's assumedly he's clean. He's a clean athlete. Definitely can shift and play in different ranges, and he showed that off a little bit in that quick sequence. So technically, yeah, maybe he has the chance of being another kind of GSP. Socially, of course, GSP means very different things to very different people, right? Very different audiences. So if you're a French Canadian from Quebec, GSP means something very different to you than if you're just an average American fan of GSP. So socially, I don't know that Sage can be. I'm curious to see what his audience is going to be. To me, you know, I do have a bit of a visual bias against the kid. I hate to say it, but you know, just his look. He just looks like a spoiled jock kind of American kid to me. But that's just a bias. I recognize that that's a bias, and I got to see, you know, what comes of him. But it is a little bit weird. Like I find it like he's been pushed on us really hard in like the last couple of weeks or whatever, before that fight last weekend, and then afterward, because he won. I mean, he went from, we never even heard of this kid like a couple of weeks ago. I had no idea who this kid was, and now he's like already a superstar of the of the UFC after spending like 1 minute in the octagon. So I don't know. I mean, it feels weird how hard he's being pushed on us, but I understand, you know, on the business side of it, this kid probably spells like big money for the UFC, just because of his looks and how young he is, you know, and already such an explosive fighter. You know, what they can do with him and groom him into is going to be very, very interesting. So we'll wait and see. As far as him being GSP, I guess I'd go on the record and say that he's not the next GSP. What he is the first Sage Northcutt in UFC, and we'll see what the heck that is going to be. We don't really know yet. It's way too early. We have to see him against some other fighters, how he does, and especially what happens when Sage Northcutt gets hurt. I have no idea what happens when Sage Northcutt gets hurt. So that's my opinion about the matter. Although, even though I have this kind of like inherent visible bias against the kid, I am interested to see what happens with him. I'll be curious to see what goes on with his next fight.